A woman's car broke down on a desolate road with a storm approaching. She was completely stranded, until John, a local crop duster pilot, landed in the heavy rain to help. The next morning, an F-16 fighter jet would intercept his small plane, turning an ordinary rescue into an incredible story. Hi everyone, welcome to Tales Unveiled. Let's get started. John Miller was a 58-year-old farmer who spent his mornings dusting crops in the same yellow Cessna he'd bought 20 years ago. He wasn't the type to chase after big dreams or flashy things. Life had taught him to enjoy the small stuff instead, and John was content with what he had, not seeing much point in complaining. Flying had been John's dream since he was young. His father, who taught him to fly, had pushed him toward the Air Force, and John had loved the idea. But life has its own plans sometimes. The family farm needed him more, and dreams of military jets gave way to crop dusting and helping neighbors make their harvests. Still, every time he heard the roar of military aircraft high above his fields, that old spark of wonder never quite went away. When other pilots refused to fly in tough conditions, John would be up there, making sure no farmer lost their harvest to pests or blight. He'd learned early that in farming communities, everyone depends on each other. Little did John know that fate had its own plans for connecting his peaceful farming life with the world of military aviation he'd always admired from afar. Everything changed one stormy evening in late August. John was finishing his final run before the weather turned worse. The dark clouds were building faster than forecast, and he needed to get his plane on the ground. That's when he saw it. A car pulled over on the dirt road below, hazard lights blinking weakly through the rain. Someone was standing beside it, waving what looked like a white scarf. John banked his Cessna around for a better look. The field beside the road was rough but flat enough. He'd landed in worse during spring planting. His radio crackled with the voice of Pete, the local field manager. "John, you're cutting it close with this weather." "Got someone stranded down here, Pete. Going to set her down and check it out." "Be careful. Storm's getting mean." The landing was rougher than he liked, the wet grass making the small plane slip slightly. As he climbed down from the cockpit, he saw an elderly woman trying to shield herself with a white cardigan. "Ma'am," he called out, jogging over, "you shouldn't be out here in this weather." Up close, she looked to be in her 70s, but carried herself with a dignified bearing despite her obvious distress. Her car was an expensive-looking sedan, the kind they don't sell in Cedar Valley. "My GPS sent me this way," she said, embarrassed. "Then the engine just died. I'm trying to reach the Air Force Base. My son." A crack of thunder cut off her words. John glanced at the darkening sky. "Ma'am, base is 80 miles north, and this storm's only getting worse. Let me radio ahead, get you some help." "But the ceremony," she started to protest. "Right now, let's get you dry." John helped her collect her things from the car. "I've got a farmhouse just over that ridge. We'll sort everything out there." The drive to his farmhouse in his old pickup was quiet, except for the drumming rain. The woman, who introduced herself as Margaret, kept checking her phone, but out here, the signal was dead. The storm had knocked out most communications in the valley. "My son's receiving his first star today," she said suddenly. "General's ceremony. I promised I'd be there." John's eyes widened as she told him about her son's heroic rescue of downed pilots. He remembered seeing something about it in the papers, how a young Air Force commander had risked everything to save his men. Now, here was that hero's mother, stranded in the rain on his farm. Suddenly, getting her to that ceremony meant more than just helping a stranger. John tried calling the base from his landline, but the lines were down. Even his emergency radio only picked up static. The storm had isolated Cedar Valley completely. At the farmhouse, John's wife Sandra took over, providing dry clothes and hot coffee. As Margaret warmed up by the fireplace, John checked the weather radar on his computer. "Storm's going to pass by morning. First light, I'll fly you close to the base. Thompson's farm has a good landing strip nearby. We can get help from there." What he didn't know was that by this time tomorrow, that simple offer would have consequences beyond anything he could imagine. In the morning, the storm had passed, leaving everything fresh and clear. John was already at his plane before sunrise, going through his usual pre-flight checks with his usual attention to detail. Margaret stood nearby, watching him work, wrapped in one of Sandra's old coats. "You're very careful with your plane," she observed. John smiled, patting the Cessna's yellow wing. "Have to be. These old birds are reliable if you treat them right." Then suddenly, Sandra came running from the house, waving a phone. "John, signal's back. There's bulletins everywhere. General Richard's promotion ceremony. They're looking for his mother. She never arrived last night." John's eye went wide with shock. "Your son is General Richards. I read about him in the papers, what he did for those downed pilots. That was something special." Margaret's eyes lit up. "You know about Michael?" "Yes, ma'am. That kind of courage deserves remembering." John helped her into the passenger seat. "Least I can do is help his mother." "Thank you so much. They're probably worried sick," Margaret said softly. "We'll get you there," John said. The takeoff was smooth. John stayed low, following the contours of the land just like he did when crop dusting. Margaret seemed to enjoy the view, pointing out landmarks below. She also took the opportunity to thank him again, appreciating everything he and his wife had done to help. They were 20 minutes from Thompson's farm when John's radio crackled. "Unknown aircraft heading north toward restricted airspace. Identify yourself immediately." John keyed his mic. "Cedar Valley local, crop duster on humanitarian flight." He never finished the sentence. A dark shape streaked past his left wing, an F-16 fighter, so close he could see the pilot's helmet. Another appeared on his right before circling back round. His heart nearly stopped at the sight. In all his years of flying, he'd never seen anything like it. His radio crackled again, this time with a voice of pure authority. "Cessna N789, you are ordered to alter course. You have entered restricted airspace without clearance." In her passenger seat, Margaret reached for the spare headset. "This is Margaret Richards. Is my son throwing one of his fits again?" The radio went silent for a long moment. Then, "Mom?" The authority in the voice cracked slightly. "Is that really you?" What happened next felt almost like a dream to John. The F-16s couldn't match the slow speed of his little yellow Cessna, but they flanked him as best they could, guiding him toward the base like an improvised honor escort. As they approached the runway, John saw the welcoming committee, a full honor guard, several high-ranking officers, and at the center, a tall man with general's stars who could only be Michael Richards. John had never landed at a military base before. His hands were shaking slightly as he brought the Cessna down, but the landing was one of his smoothest ever. As they taxied to a stop, he couldn't help but feel a surge of pride, a humble crop duster, flying in formation with the Air Force's finest. General Richards helped his mother from the plane, hugging her tightly. "Mom, we've been worried sick when you didn't show up." Then he turned to John. "Sir, thank you for bringing her safely. That was some pretty impressive flying for a crop duster." One of the F-16 pilots had joined them, helmet under his arm. "General, you should have seen him handling those crosswinds. He brought her in smooth as silk." "Well," John said modestly, "when you've dodged as many barn towers as I have, crosswinds aren't so bad." Everyone laughed, and suddenly, John wasn't just a farmer in his work clothes. He was one of them, a pilot who'd done his job well. They invited him to the ceremony, seated him with honor. For one incredible day, his yellow Cessna shared the tarmac with fighter jets worth more than his entire farm. The best moment came when they were giving him a tour of an F-16 cockpit. General Richards grinned and said, "You know, Mr. Miller, with flying skills like yours, I bet you could dust a whole lot of crops with one of these." "Maybe so," John laughed, "but my old Cessna doesn't need quite so much paperwork to fuel up." Today, John still flies his yellow Cessna over Cedar Valley's fields. His grandchildren never tire of hearing about that morning when their grandfather's crop duster flew alongside F-16s, how the Air Force's finest escorted a humble farm plane to a perfect landing. The photos on his wall tell the story. A small yellow plane surrounded by sleek fighters, a moment when doing the right thing led to something extraordinary. Margaret would share her own version with her grandchildren, but her story was never just about the dramatic rescue or the military escort. It was about John, a man who saw a stranger in need and didn't hesitate to help. She'd always say, "In a world that asks, 'What's in it for me?' John simply asked, What do you need? That morning, a humble farmer in his old crop duster learned that life's biggest moments often begin with the smallest choices, like stopping to help someone lost in the rain.
Love this story? Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. Don't forget to check out the video currently on your screen. You won't want to miss it. See you in the next one.